Welcome back. The DA says the VAT increase, corruption and nepotism remain a challenge for the ANC-led government. The party's been presenting its assessment of government's performance this morning. It's proposing, among other things, the introduction of an entity that will compete with Eskom. Let's take a listen.
Of the 15 debates that shaped the national agenda this year in Parliament, all confirmed the now obvious but very inconvenient for some truth, that this binary narrative that there is a good ANC and a bad ANC is false. There is only the ANC. The outcomes of the debates on the recession recovery, the fuel price increase and the VBS heist continue to serve as a eulogy to this organisation. A final resting call where Parliament's lights switched off while the Eskom inquiry report was being debated and the Constitutional Review Committee's report's final words that the bedrock of people's property rights are up for grabs. While the DA exposed how deep state capture runs in the national power utility and voted against this dangerous constitutional amendment, much of South Africa remains in darkness, while the People's Bill of Rights is being walked all over. As unfair a burden placed by government on ordinary South Africans has been the VAT increase, ballooning bailouts and the spiralling cost of fuel, one might have hoped the recession recovery debate might have offered more responsible alternatives. But it was not long after until the House found itself processing how 2 billion rand was looted from the VBS Bank by the ANC and the EFF. Nothing has changed over the course of the last 18 months. The ANC acts only for connected insiders, and poor and vulnerable outsiders come stone last. The DA's laying of criminal charges against Minister Mkhize and former Northwest Premier Supra Mamapelo for their involvement in the VBS scandal is only the beginning of our fight for the victims of this national shame. Speaking up for the voiceless against an unchangeable ANC requires more than actionless debates. It demands the use of law as a tool to drive change. But rather than guiding South Africa's true north, Parliament's lawmaking function has regressed on the national agenda. The last 2 years have seen amongst the lowest output of legislation since the first democratic parliament began in 1994. We've seen as well that even with a 62% majority in the House, the ANC cannot pass its own legislation. And I think the opposition defeat of the RABS bill in this past week has been a very, very good example of that. If any bill should currently find itself as South Africa's priority, it's the DA's cheaper energy bill, which seeks to separate Eskom into separate electricity generation and transmission units, allowing independent power producers to fairly compete with Eskom for power provision. This competition will reduce the massive monopoly Eskom has on electricity prices, will make electricity cheaper for ordinary South Africans, and our electricity supply more secure, and steer our country clear from the heart of darkness that Eskom has plunged us into.
All right, let's get you some analysis on this story now. Political analyst and anchor on The Fix, Karima Brown, joins us in studio now. Karima, thanks very much for coming in.
Thanks.
Well, it's election season in full swing, isn't it?
Absolutely. Look, this is the last time the DA will, in a comprehensive way, have an opportunity to comment on the African National Congress. And let's all agree it has been a tumultuous year, not just for the African National Congress, but also for the Democratic Alliance. It has a breakaway party, for example, in a city where it has a 2/3 majority. But of course, the big fight is in the African National Congress. And unlike Mr. Steenhuisen, there is actually a good and a bad ANC. There's competing political projects in there, which is why state capture is being fought by civil society, but also by members of the African National Congress. And I think that what the DA is trying to do is to say that the measures are a little too late, and of course this is one organization and they must be judged as such. But if it was one organization, then we wouldn't have seen the removal of someone like former President Jacob Zuma, when the ANC basically said, if you don't want to go by yourself, we will vote with the opposition to get rid of you, for example. example, Cyril Ramaphosa would not have sacked 10 cabinet members when he had the opportunity to do so. Remember, he inherited a cabinet. But I think overall the DA is not wrong on the fact that there are some fundamental things that need to be rethought. For example, our state-owned companies. And state-owned companies have two priorities. They are supposed to be developmental in nature, which means they have to take into consideration our inequality, our poverty, our joblessness, but they also need to be run properly and efficiently. And of course, they were the centers of state capture, and Eskom was actually the mainstay of that state capture project. And as we could see from the briefing that Pravin Gordhan had last week, that the new board is only beginning to understand the depth of the rot that has been there. I mean, we haven't even started at places like Petro SA, for example, SAA, we have some idea, but essentially the last 10 years or so was in fact a period where you had a president who built a state within a state. So opposition parties are correct to point to the weaknesses of the African National Congress. I think where Mr. Steenhuisen, who's normally quite an astute politician, is making a mistake is to suggest that there is one ANC. It's a contested organization, deeply, deeply contested. We saw that in the run-up to Nasrec. We saw the political killings, for example. It wasn't easy to get Cyril Ramaphosa elected. He was elected by a very narrow margin. So I think the DA would like to let South Africans believe that there's only one ANC, and the ANC would also like us to believe that. But we know there are competing projects. There are people who actually do want the Constitution to triumph and to rule by a set of laws that are enacted. And that is why, for example, you have the Zondo Commission of Inquiry. That is why you had the Commission of Inquiry at Parliament into Eskom. That is why you are having a committee that looked at who to appoint as the head of the NPA instead of the president just exercising his prerogative. So factually, on the nature of the contradiction in the ANC, the DA is wrong. But the problems that they've identified, they're spot on.
I mean, you know that there's politicking at play when Mmusi Maimane talks about us facing a black Christmas.
Yes.
When the Public Enterprises Minister himself has promised that there will be no load shedding over the festive season.
Absolutely. In fact, today and tomorrow there will also be no load shedding. That announcement was made earlier this morning because they've managed to fix the problem. And what the minister has said is that over that Christmas period they will work non-stop. As you know, the leave of all executives at Eskom have been cancelled, so they're in emergency mode. More than that, they've also established a committee in the presidency to assist Eskom specifically to deal with some of the issues, because what you have is, on the one hand, you must keep the lights on, but on the other hand, Eskom has a massive cash crisis. It is looking for a massive injection of cash or a guarantee so that it can go to the borrower's market and begin to talk about that. We have only now been given a full picture of what is going on, but I think that Eskom is going to be the litmus test, really, for the president as well as Pravin Gordhan. And of course, you must remember there are many people who are in the state capture project who doesn't want the cleanup to succeed. There's fight backs. You see Tom Moyane doing it, for example. You see a number of other people doing it. Suprema Umapelo challenging the National Executive Committee on, disbanding the PEC. So this is going to be a long, protracted battle. What the DA is looking for is they're looking for an anchor to hook their election campaign on, because Jacob Zuma is no longer there. And there is a lot of support for the initiatives of Cyril Ramaphosa, despite the narrow margin in which he has to do it. So the Democratic Alliance, like other opposition parties, need to find a coherent narrative for going into this election. And the best narrative they have is, of course, that this is one party. They're no good or bad guys. They're all bad guys. That's it's the first time, in fact, that I think the DA is beginning to understand how it needs to actually attack the African National Congress because, of course, Jacob Zuma isn't the convenient whipping boy anymore.
I mean, very quickly before you go, Karima, as you said at the beginning, there's no denying the challenges within the governing party. But it's very interesting as well to look at the challenges within the Democratic Alliance.
Yes.
I mean, Mmusi Maimane has chosen to speak now. On several occasions in the very recent past, he's chosen to speak at particular moments in his party where it seemed to be in crisis. One of these come to mind. As 3 councillors resigned in Cape Town, one after the other, we followed his Twitter timeline. There was not a single comment from him.
There's actually 2. The other is the crisis in Tshwane around the city manager and the Glad Africa contract, which is 12 billion rand, which of course is under scrutiny. The Auditor General has already spoken about it. And Mmusi Maimane has conveniently parked that off as provincial issues. He only speaks about national issues. But here's the thing for the Democratic Alliance. It needs to increase its base in the majority areas. It rules the city of Cape Town, which is a fairly rich council, and it couldn't deal, for example, with the water crisis. It has a breakaway. It hasn't followed through on processes against Patricia de Lille, for example, as a party holding her accountable. That was the deal that she and Mmusi made. And of course, she's fighting them in court. So the DA comes into this fight with the ANC on the back foot. They have also lost Nelson Mandela. Athol Trollip is no longer the mayor. So their victories that they have had in the 2016 election is in fact being impacted on by the very fact that coalition governments are governments of expediency and not principle. And of course, the DA still has to explain to South Africans why it has a working relationship with the EFF, who is the ideological opposite of what it is. So I think that the DA is going to try and stitch together a narrative that it can take to the electorate that is credible and that is going to try and defeat the optimism that there is about the fact that there's change in the ANC and that there is enough groundswell in the party for reform. If they don't do that, they are going to be left in the dust. You see the EFF struggling with exactly the same thing. The problem for the EFF, of course, is that it's coming out on the side of the bad guys, people like Tom Moyane and others, and that's got to do, of course, with their links to some of the people that SARS has been investigating. So the ANC has always scored a lot of own goals. They have messed up, they have done wrong in a whole range of areas, and of course with the protection of Jacob Zuma. But they've always had, Michelle, the gift of weak opposition, and it's no different this time. The Democratic Alliance isn't coherent enough. I mean, we're waiting for the DA's policy announcement. Gwen Ngwenya was supposed to announce the policies of the DA. We're still waiting. We don't know what it is, and how are people going to make up their mind. So that's another challenge for the Democratic Alliance as we go ahead, less than, 14 months before the elections.
Yeah, absolutely. Election season in full swing. Thanks very much for that. Karima Brown is, of course, our political analyst and anchor on the fix, joining us in studio, giving us some analysis as the Democratic Alliance delivers its assessment of government performance. Now, coming up, we take you live to Alexandra. That's where residents are rebuilding their homes after that massive fire destroyed more than 500 structures last week. That and much, much more right here on ENCA now.